Chief Lloyd Phillips and Winona Polson-Lahache are live in the KTV studios to talk about the Conservative government's proposed Federal Education Act.
Jumping right into it, the AFNQL held a special chiefs meeting in Odenak on Wednesday, March 13th. The subject, the proposed Federal Education Act. Lloyd Phillips was there on behalf of the MCK and joins us right now, along with political technician on the file, Winona Polson-Lahache, and welcome to the show. Let's start with you, Lloyd. Briefly, just give us a recap on why this meeting was called and what occurred there.
Well, as people may have heard, the federal government is proposing a new federal act which covers First Nation education. And this act is coming very quickly down the pike, as we see with many other laws that Canada has been doing. And they're calling for a consultation process with First Nations, but what we're seeing here is this consultation process is not even really panning out to be a consultation process. It's more of they want to just play smoke and mirrors a bit here. They want us to be able to sit down and ask a few questions over a couple of hours, and then they want to run off into their little quiet rooms there and draft some legislation. I mean, that's the very basic way of looking at it. But really, what we're seeing here is another attempt for Canada to be that big brother parentalistic approach on education and trying to coin this in a way of being accountable and moving forward.
Winona, you've looked at the proposed legislation. Can you tell us what the essential elements are? I mean, it's obviously going to be a big, giant document, but if you could boil it down to its essence, the essential elements, and the specific impacts that it will have on education here in Kahnawake.
Yeah, I'll just clarify first that they haven't tabled any full legislation yet, so what they have is a discussion guide, and the discussion guide will be the framework for what the legislation will look like. I've reviewed the discussion guide, and what's in there is really they're proposing to really sort of standardize and certify all of the processes and requirements that education will encompass. This goes right from standardizing the curriculum, standardizing the way that the schools actually function internally in terms of operations. It also includes certification, trying to establish recognized high school diplomas, which all sounds great. The problem is that who's actually creating the standards is a real issue. There's no description of that in the discussion guide right now, so we can only assume that it would be the federal government with probably little or no First Nations input or involvement in that. Aside from standardization and certification, they're also looking at the way that schools are governed and really narrowing down how they're governed and taking the way that community or band, what they call now band operated schools, and providing communities with options of really they're looking at 3 options. So you could continue to run your school as is, but there's not a lot of I'll say commitment in what the funds would look like to continue to support those schools. And the second option that they're looking at is to enter into or to develop sort of First Nation school boards amongst several communities, I guess, that would operate these schools on your behalf. And the other option is to enter into agreements to either have provincial school boards run the school for you, or you would send your kids in your community to a provincially run school.
Wow. How do you interpret this?
Well, I mean, what it really comes down to is we've been hearing about offloading, to the provinces. It's going in that trend where the federal government is just trying to push the responsibility onto the provinces and try to make it a provincial responsibility. But it's opening the doors to where they're going to have more and more control over First Nation schools, and they're trying, in Kahnawake in particular, for trying to get more control by way of dollars. So if you don't meet the criteria that we're setting out in this legislation, if you don't follow our rules, and then basically we're not going to fund you or not going to fund you properly. And there's already short funds and funding, so it's setting a very dangerous precedent.
Does that come to curriculum as well?
Well, curriculum is part of it. When you're talking about stuff like mathematics and English and things of that nature, it's not a problem. Everybody wants to have a high quality standard education. But when it comes to issues of language and culture and things of that nature, where you want to incorporate the sense of who you are as a Mohawk, who you are as a First Nations person within the curriculum, there's no give and take in that area. There's no funding for language, no funding for culture, but yet they still want to keep pushing on you with what they view as the proper standards.
Okay. Winona, you've been watching some of the so-called consultations with the First Nations that are taking place in Western Canada. What seems to be the government's strategy there?
Well, I'll just explain that the way that First Nations seem to be tackling the consultations out west, particularly, I guess, is they're taking strong positions that they're attending the sessions and saying that this does not serve as consultation, and what adequate or proper consultation would be to go to the communities and consult with all of the communities, not not this sort of high level, very limited consultation that they're conducting now, right? I think that that's their strategy. One of the things they're doing is they're not only hearing from First Nations leadership, but they're also hearing from community members. And there's actually a lot of individuals who are going there that don't have or understand community context or day-to-day operations. And one of the things they're going there is they're going there and they're supporting that, you know, the system needs to be regulated without fully understanding the context of it.
Well, it sounds good. We're going to make standards and it'll be the highest standards, but not really knowing the nuts and bolts can get you into trouble. Lloyd, with respect to the Harper government's residential schools apologies, how does that come into play in context with this proposed legislation?
Well, it's kind of, no, if it wasn't so serious, it'd be humorous, because here's a government who took it upon themselves or was pushed and forced into making the apology for residential schools and acknowledging all the damage that residential schools did to the language and culture of First Nations, Kahnawake in particular, as well as across the country. But yet, when they come forward and propose legislation to regulate or work with First Nations, they totally ignore language and they totally ignore culture. So they don't want to put their money where their mouth is. No, on one hand, they say, no, yes, we acknowledge we did a lot of things that are wrong, but now we're moving forward, and forget about the past now. Maybe they figure they apologize now, so they can forget that, which is the furthest thing from the minds of Kahnawake and across the country, that language and culture are vital to our survival, and it has to be funded appropriately.
As far as urgency is concerned, what's the time frame that the government's looking at to have this law passed and implemented?
Well, our latest information we have is they're trying very hard to get this passed and implemented by September of 2014.
Which is next year.
Which is a very short time frame for such a large piece of legislation. But again, we've been saying it, we've seen Bill C-45 with the whole Idle No More movement and other laws that they've been pushing forward. This government is really trying to set its feet soundly in where they want the direction, or they think the direction for First Nations in the whole country, for that matter, wants to go, and they're moving very, very quickly, and it's alarming, because we're going to have to ensure that we have this from a legal, political point of view, that we're properly consulted, and that appropriate actions are taken, because along with what Winona said, in Quebec, the meeting we had, the strong position we took was, we don't view this as consultation whatsoever, and that we have to stand together, united, to ensure that the government has to do a proper consultation with all First Nations, and that it has to be tied to direct, adequate funding, not just sustainable funding. It has to be adequate funding, and as well as to ensure that it's recognizing the jurisdiction and authority of communities to run their own education systems.
Final question with regard to the home front. We have our own issues here within the community with regard to education, obviously, over the last year. What's the most important thing that Kahnawake needs to do to fight this as a community?
As a community, a few things. Yeah, I first have to acknowledge we all understand there's ongoing issues with the education system and the combined school committee, but that's local issues. But what we need to do is ensure that we have a very strong, let's have a school committee that is there, strong committee that's going to defend and support the curriculum and support the schools and support the parents, and also have combined with a good political strategy where the council will take our role to ensure that we're out there meeting with governments, pushing our issues forward, so we can almost have a tag team approach to ensure that we're protecting Kahnawake as a whole. Let's not fight over internal politics. Let's ensure that the enemy is out there with the federal government. Let's ensure that we stand together strong and defend what we have.
Lloyd, Winona, thank you.